I know this is called pizza Swiss steak, but this isn't really like the kind of pizza we're used to. Onions are gonna be the only topping. Today I'm going to make a pizza Swiss steak from a 1963 edition of Better Homes and Gardens cookbook. Then I'm going to make a modern take on the same dish and see which one I like better. So I'm pretty intrigued by this pizza Swiss steak. I've never made anything like it, and the recipe is really simple. So first I'm going to mix the flour, salt, and pepper. Feels easy enough. Next it says to pound into steak. So this is a 2-pound round steak. This is a more affordable cut, so I think that's kind of the idea behind this, like making a whole meal for your family with this, you know, pretty massive piece of meat. So I'm guessing it wants me to kind of dust the whole thing with flour and then pound it. I think what's interesting about this recipe is it seems like you're kind of like making a pizza or a riff on pizza, but instead of dough, you've got steak. Okay, I'm just gonna wash my hands. Okay, so the recipe doesn't specify how thin to pound it. I'm gonna guess a 1/4 inch. I've never had to do this with such a big cut of meat before, so it's not really doing anything. This feels unnecessary. You know, round steak isn't something that today we see often in recipes. I think you would see more of a roast, and the process of Swissing is to tenderize it. So I imagine like this is the Swissing process. I've just never done it before. Okay, next step. Brown slowly on both sides in 3 tablespoons of fat. To really brown it and get a good crust, you want high heat, but it's saying to do it slowly, so I think if we were in the 50s, you know, this would be fat that the cooks have saved. You know, it's kind of economical and creative, which is kind of like the name of the game of 50s cooking. I actually do that too. We've got some lard. There's no cooking time, but I imagine this is gonna take quite a few minutes. It's such a big piece of meat, and to cover all that surface area, I bet at least 10 minutes aside. Okay, so while my meat is browning, it says combine remaining ingredients except for onion. So we've got pizza sauce, tomato sauce, oregano, sugar, and water. I wonder if the water is just to thin it out? I'm also curious about the mix of like both tomato sauce and pizza sauce. Like pizza sauce is basically tomato sauce with oil and water in it. I have to say I really appreciate how simple this recipe is. Like it feels like it's probably something really exciting to see on the table, but comes together pretty quickly. Okay, I think this is browned sufficiently. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So I'm just gonna brown the other side, and once that has like another good golden brown crust, I'm gonna add the tomato sauce. Okay, so the recipe says pour the sauce right over the meat and then top it with the onion slices. Feels very experimental. So what I'm thinking is that this is such a thick cut of meat. Putting it in the oven for an hour, it's not really braising it. It's not really enough time, but I think the tomato sauce will kind of like act like a braising agent, so the meat should become pretty tender. I'm just gonna pop this in the oven for an hour and see what happens. Okay, big reveal. It looks pretty good. The steak has really shrunk in size. It's more like 1.5 pounds now, and the onions look cooked, look delicious. I'm pretty excited about this. It doesn't say how to serve it, but I think you just kind of serve it in one go. Maybe with some of the sauce around it. It smells like pizza. So this is a lot of tomato. I wonder if you're supposed to put all of it on. One of the things that is so interesting to me about these old recipes is that they're really not very specific. Like they really put a lot of trust into the home cook to know what they're doing. I feel like this is enough sauce though. Like it's kind of like floating in tomato sauce. This feels sufficient. I think it's time to try it. This is really exciting. This feels like big and festive. I can totally imagine a 1950s family feeling so excited to come home to this. I mean, it looks great. It smells great. Okay, I think we need to move to a cutting board. This definitely looks different than cuts that we are used to today. Okay, let's see. The flavor of the tomato sauce is delicious. I think if I were to make this again, I would choose another cut of steak. It's a bit tough in this preparation. I think it needs just more time than an hour in the oven. It kind of looks like a brisket. You know, it's kind of like begging for the low and slow treatment. But I do think the flavor, the tomatoes, the onions, it does taste like pizza. So now that I've done the then recipe, I'm gonna do a now recipe. I think there's a few ways to go with this. Either the tomato pizza kind of focus way or the steak way. Do I want to make a dough? Does that feel like too far from this? I kind of like the idea of doing steak. I can make a saucy element with tomatoes. Maybe there could be some other like flavor elements like capers. I think that's the one. That sounds more exciting than pizza. And maybe I get crazy and try to flambe it with cognac. That sounds fun. I feel like it's a little ridiculous to say that I'm so excited about my version of this, but I really, really am. I mean, these ribeyes are so gorgeous. I'm gonna season them really simply with salt and pepper on both sides. So you wanna get your pan hot, using cast iron, which adds a really great sear to it. Neutral oil, high smoke point, that is your friend. You wanna get it so that the pan is almost smoking, but your hand a few inches above. Obviously, don't touch it. And does it feel hot? Feels hot. That sound is another really good indicator. So I'm searing the steaks on the cast iron first, and then I'm gonna finish it off in the oven. There's so many ways to cook steak, but this is my personal favorite. It's just really easy to get it right. Once the steak comes out of the oven, I'm gonna make a really simple pan sauce in the same fat. This is just kind of like a nod to the pizza Swiss steak. So I think these steaks are probably ready to flip. Got a really gorgeous golden brown here. Looks like the pan is a little uneven, so I'm actually gonna flip them so the other side gets brown too. A really easy way to tell if steak is ready to flip is if it just comes off easily from the pan. Just a warning, you will smell like steak if you do it like this. Steak, and especially ribeye, feels like pretty celebratory to me. Like, I feel like giving someone a perfect ribeye is really like, I love you. There we go, that's what I want. This beautiful, like, deep crust, and that's just gonna add flavor. These steaks have such a big fat cap on it. I just wanna sear it to render that fat. We could actually save all the fat from this steak, put it in the fridge, and then use it for something like the pizza Swiss steak. I'm gonna pop the steak in the oven for 2 to 3 minutes. It really depends on your steak preference. I like my steak on the rare side. Popping it in the oven is just gonna help get the internal temperature of the steak up to, 140, 145. I think if you have a really good piece of meat, it doesn't really take much. That's why I like it on the medium rare side. I'm gonna let the steak rest on the cutting board for a few minutes. This is a way to really let the juices of the steak kind of seep back into it, kind of capture all that flavor. And while that happens, we can move on to the pan sauce. Just adding tomatoes, shallots, and capers. Nice like brininess, which should go well with kind of like the fat of the steak. I'm just gonna cook this down until the tomatoes get kind of saucy. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt, but because there's salt on the steaks, there's still like salt in the pan, so you don't wanna go too crazy. I've got some cognac here, and we're gonna try to flambe it. Flambeing it is just to light it on fire. It's a way to cook off the alcohol. It looks really exciting, which feels like, something in the 50s they would do a lot about show-stopping moments. And it's gonna have flavor. Flambe! And if you do this at home, obviously be very careful. The flames are gonna cook off by themselves, so you don't really need anything. If you wanna be extra safe, you can have, a big lid somewhere to smash it down. I wish you could smell it. It smells so good. So you've got the smell of the cognac, but not of the alcohol. I'm gonna add a few tablespoons of butter, and this is just to kind of make it this really glossy sauce. Another great thing about this recipe, by the time the sauce is done, the steak is ready to cut. This ribeye is cooked exactly how I want it to. It's still pink, it's got that gorgeous crust. It feels really tender as I'm cutting it. I like serving steak like this, like on a big platter at a dinner party. It feels really festive. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I'm just gonna spoon the tomatoes. I think I'm ready to taste it. I'm just gonna go straight off the platter because it's my own. This recipe really exceeded my expectations just because of the flavor, the texture, the contrast of it all. I love the saucy tomatoes with this like really melt in your mouth steak. The flavor of the cognac is coming through. It just feels like there's a lot more going on, even though it's actually a really simple recipe. I had no idea what to expect with the pizza Swiss steak, and I thought it kind of exceeded expectations. It was much better than I thought it would be. This was also better than I thought it would be, and I thought this was gonna be pretty good. I would make this again and again, and I think to make the pizza Swiss steak, I would need to make some tweaks to the recipe. Let me know in the comments what you think of the pizza Swiss steak. Would you make any tweaks? Would you use another cut of meat? And let me know what you thought of my interpretation. Do you think there's something I could have done differently or been more creative? I'd love to hear.